The small grooming salon smelled of wet dog and lavender shampoo, a combination that had long since stopped registering to Emma's senses. She worked her fingers through the golden retriever's matted fur, her back aching from 4 hours of standing at the grooming table, her hands pruned from constant exposure to water. The dog, a sweet-natured thing named Biscuit, stood patiently on the rubber mat, occasionally turning to lick Emma's wrist in gratitude or solidarity. She was never quite sure which. The bell above the front door chimed, and Emma glanced up through the glass partition that separated the grooming area from the small waiting room. A girl stood just inside the entrance, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with dark curls that fell past her shoulders and enormous brown eyes that seemed too large for her delicate face. She wore a pink jacket despite the June heat, zipped all the way to her chin, and she clutched a small white dog against her chest with the kind of desperate grip that spoke of needing something to hold on to. "I'll be right with you," Emma called, setting down her comb and wiping her hands on her already damp apron. The girl didn't respond, just stood there frozen in the doorway, like she wasn't quite sure she was allowed to be inside. Emma recognized that stillness, that careful immobility of children who'd learned that taking up space could be dangerous. She finished quickly with Biscuit, gave him a treat and a kiss on his damp head, then led him back to the waiting area, where his owner scrolled through her phone with the glazed expression of someone killing time. Money changed hands, pleasantries were exchanged, and then it was just Emma and the girl with the small white dog. "Hi there," Emma said, keeping her voice gentle, keeping her body language open and non-threatening in the way she'd learned from years of working with anxious animals. "What's your name?" "Sofia," the girl whispered, so quietly Emma almost didn't hear. "Sofia Caruso. That's a beautiful name. And who's this?" Emma gestured to the dog, a Maltese with fur that desperately needed attention, matted and dirty in a way that suggested neglect, or at least prolonged lack of care. "Luna!" Sophia's grip tightened fractionally on the dog. "She needs a bath. She smells bad." Emma crouched down to the girl's level, noting the shadows under those two large eyes, the gauntness in her cheeks that spoke of missed meals or stress, or both. "She does need a bath. Has she been getting into things? My nanny was supposed to take care of her, but she quit, and the new one doesn't like dogs." Sophia's voice carried a matter-of-fact quality that broke Emma's heart. "My papa said I could bring her here. He gave me money." She fumbled in her jacket pocket with one hand, still holding Luna with the other, and produced a crumpled $100 bill. "Okay," Emma said slowly. "Is your papa here? I usually need a parent or guardian to sign some paperwork before I can—" "He's working. He's always working." Sophia's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes dimmed. "He said I could walk here by myself. It's only 3 blocks." 3 blocks in a city where 8-year-old girls shouldn't be walking alone, where traffic didn't stop, and strangers didn't always have good intentions. Emma felt anger spark in her chest, quick and hot, at whatever parent would send their child out into the world so casually. But she'd learned long ago that judging accomplished nothing, that families came in all configurations of dysfunction, that children loved their parents even when those parents failed them in fundamental ways. "All right," Emma said, making a decision that probably violated several business policies. "Let's get Luna cleaned up. You want to help?" For the first time, Sophia's expression changed, a flicker of something that might have been hope, quickly suppressed like she'd learned not to expect good things. "Really?" "Really! Come on back." Emma led Sophia into the grooming area, setting up a smaller tub that would be easier for the child to reach. She lifted Luna gently from Sophia's arms, noting how the dog trembled but didn't struggle. Another sign of an animal that had learned resistance was futile. As she set Luna in the tub and began running lukewarm water, Sophia shrugged out of her pink jacket and hung it carefully on a hook by the door. That's when Emma saw the burns. They ran up Sophia's left arm, circular marks in various stages of healing, some fresh and angry red, others faded to pink scars, all unmistakably the size and shape of cigarettes. Emma's hands stilled on Luna's wet fur, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. She'd seen burns like that before, during her brief stint volunteering at a children's hospital, during the dark years when her own sister had been trapped in a relationship that left marks no one else could see. Sofia noticed Emma staring and quickly crossed her arms over her chest, her expression shutting down completely. "It's nothing," she said, the words coming too fast, too practiced. "I'm clumsy. I bumped into things." "Sofia," Emma started, her voice carefully controlled despite the rage building in her chest. "I don't want to talk about it." Sofia's voice rose slightly, panic threading through the words. "Luna needs her bath. That's why we're here, just for Luna's bath." Emma made herself breathe, made herself think past the immediate fury that someone had hurt this child, this small girl who'd walked 3 blocks alone to get help for her dog, because no one else would. She'd been working with animals long enough to know that you couldn't force trust, couldn't demand vulnerability. You had to create space for it, had to prove safety through action rather than words. "You're right," Emma said quietly. "Luna needs her bath. Can you help me wet her back legs?" They worked in silence for several minutes, Emma showing Sofia how to massage the shampoo into Luna's matted fur, how to be gentle around the dog's ears and eyes. Sofia's hands were small and careful, her touch tentative but kind, and Luna gradually stopped trembling under their combined attention. Emma watched the girl from the corner of her eye, noting how she bit her lip in concentration, how she startled slightly at loud noises from the street outside, how she kept glancing toward the door like she expected someone to burst through at any moment. "Sofia," Emma said finally, as they rinsed the last of the suds from Luna's white fur. "Those marks on your arm, I need you to tell me the truth about them. Did someone hurt you?" Sofia's hands froze in Luna's wet coat. For a long moment, she didn't speak, didn't move, barely seemed to breathe. Then, "My nanny, the old one. She got mad when I didn't finish my dinner. Said I was being ungrateful, that my papa paid her to make sure I ate." The words came out flat, emotionless, in that way children had of reporting horrors they'd normalized. Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach, something that felt like responsibility, like the weight of a choice that would alter the trajectory of this child's life. "Where's the nanny now?" Emma asked. "Gone. My papa fired her 2 weeks ago. Luna bit her, and she told my papa I'd been bad, that I'd set Luna on her, but I didn't. Luna was protecting me." Sofia's voice cracked slightly on the last words, the first real emotion breaking through her careful composure. "My papa believed the nanny. He always believes them. He's never home enough to know." Emma should have called child services. She knew the protocols, knew the mandated reporter laws, knew that this was exactly the kind of situation those systems were designed to address. But she also knew how those systems worked in practice: the overwhelmed caseworkers, the months-long investigations, the foster homes that weren't always better than the situations children were removed from. She knew that sometimes the machinery of protection caused as much damage as the abuse it was meant to stop. And something in her gut said that Sofia's father needed to know that whatever neglect he was guilty of came from absence rather than malice, that the cigarette burns would horrify him as much as they horrified Emma. It was a gamble, trusting her instinct over protocol. But Emma had spent her life reading the subtle signals that animals and people gave off when they were scared or hurt or simply overwhelmed, and something in Sofia's voice when she mentioned her papa, some combination of longing and frustration, told Emma that the relationship there wasn't broken, just strained to the point of snapping. "Does your papa have a phone number where I can reach him?" Emma asked. Sofia's eyes widened, fear flashing across her features. "You're going to tell him? He'll be so mad. He doesn't like when people bother him at work." "He needs to know about this, Sofia. And if he gets mad, that's not your fault. That's on him for not paying attention sooner." Emma kept her voice firm but gentle. "Can you give me his number?" Sofia recited the digits slowly, reluctantly, while Emma dried her hands and pulled out her phone. Her finger hovered over the call button for just a moment, doubt creeping in. What if she was wrong? What if the father was complicit? What if he didn't care? What if calling him put Sofia in more danger? But the alternative was doing nothing, and Emma had spent too much of her life watching people choose inaction, because action was hard. She pressed call. The phone rang twice before a voice answered, male and curt, and carrying an edge that suggested he didn't appreciate interruptions. Who is this? My name is Emma Torres. I run a dog grooming business on Maple Street. Your daughter Sofia is here with me, and we need to talk. There was a pause, long enough that Emma wondered if he'd hung up. Then, is Sofia hurt? Is she safe? The immediate concern in his voice eased something in Emma's chest. She's physically fine right now, but I need you to come here immediately. There's something you need to see. I'm in the middle of, he started, and Emma could hear the automatic dismissal forming. Mr. Caruso, Emma interrupted, putting every ounce of authority she possessed into her voice. Your daughter has cigarette burns all over her arm. Someone has been abusing her, and you need to come here right now, or I'm calling Child Protective Services and the police. Your choice. The silence that followed was different, sharp, dangerous, the kind of quiet that came before violence. When he spoke again, his voice was so controlled, it was almost mechanical. Don't move. Don't let her leave. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead. Emma looked at Sofia, who had gone pale, her small body rigid with tension. He's coming, Emma said simply. And whatever happens, you did nothing wrong. Do you understand me? Adults are supposed to protect children, not hurt them. None of this is your fault. Sofia nodded, but Emma could see she didn't really believe it, could see the weight of responsibility this child carried for the failures of every adult in her life. They finished drying Luna in silence, Emma working on autopilot while her mind raced through possible scenarios. She'd made the call. Now she had to live with the consequences. 7 minutes later, a black Mercedes pulled up outside with the kind of aggressive parking that suggested the driver had no concern for tickets or towing. The man who emerged was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. His dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. He moved with purpose toward the salon door, and Emma saw Sofia shrink back instinctively, saw the fear and longing war across her young face. The bell chimed as Antonio Caruso, because that's clearly who this was, entered the grooming salon. He dominated the small space immediately, his presence filling the room in a way that had nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with the authority he radiated. His eyes found Sofia first, scanning her frantically for injuries, and Emma saw relief flash across his features before his gaze shifted to Emma with an intensity that made her take an involuntary step back. "Show me," he said, and it wasn't a request. Emma gestured to Sofia. "Show your papa your arm, sweetheart." Sofia's hands trembled as she held out her left arm, the burns visible in the fluorescent lighting of the salon. Emma watched Antonio's face as he took in the marks, watched the color drain from his features, watched his jaw clench so tight she could see the muscle jumping, watched his hands curl into fists at his sides. For a moment, she thought he might put his fist through her wall, might explode with the kind of rage that would send Sofia scrambling for cover. But he didn't. Instead, he dropped to his knees in front of his daughter, bringing himself to her eye level, and when he reached out to touch her arm, his hands were gentle despite the violence she could see coiled in every line of his body. "Who did this to you?" His voice was rough, scraped raw with emotion he was barely containing. "Mrs. Dawson," Sofia whispered. "The nanny, but you fired her already, so—" "When did this happen? How long has this been going on?" Sofia's lower lip trembled. "A few months. She got mad a lot, said I was difficult." Antonio closed his eyes, and Emma saw something break in his expression, saw guilt and fury and grief all crash over him simultaneously. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. Tesoro, I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have been there. You're always working, Sofia said, and there was no accusation in her tone, just simple fact, which somehow made it worse. I know, I know, and that's my failure, not yours. Antonio pulled Sofia into his arms, careful of her injured arm, and Emma saw him bury his face in his daughter's hair. His shoulders shook slightly, and Emma looked away, giving them a moment of privacy in her small salon. When Antonio finally pulled back, he looked at Emma with an expression that was complex and difficult to read. Gratitude mixed with shame, respect mixed with something that might have been wariness. You called me instead of the authorities. I called you because your daughter needs her father, not a caseworker, Emma said quietly. But make no mistake, Mr. Caruso, if I see Sofia again with any new injuries, if I suspect for even a moment that she's not safe, I will call every agency that exists. Clear? Something that might have been amusement flickered in Antonio's eyes despite the circumstances. Very clear, Ms. Torres. You have my word that Sofia will be protected, and that I will personally ensure Mrs. Dawson understands the consequences of touching my daughter. The way he said it made Emma's blood run cold. She'd heard that tone before, from men who operated outside the law, from men whose promises of consequences were not idle threats. She looked at Antonio Caruso more carefully. The expensive suit, the commanding presence, the Mercedes outside, the way he'd dropped everything to come immediately, and understanding dawned with uncomfortable clarity. I don't need to know about consequences, Emma said firmly. I need to know that Sofia is safe and cared for going forward. She will be. Antonio stood, keeping one hand on Sofia's shoulder. What do I owe you for the grooming? Nothing. Consider it done. I don't accept charity. And I don't accept money from people whose children I've just traumatized by making them reveal abuse. Emma crossed her arms. Take your daughter home, Mr. Caruso. Make sure she eats dinner. Maybe stay home from work tomorrow. That's payment enough. Antonio studied her for a long moment, and Emma forced herself to hold his gaze despite the urge to look away from those dark eyes that seemed to see far too much. Finally, he nodded. Thank you, Ms. Torres. You did the right thing calling me. I hope so, Emma said quietly. Antonio helped Sofia back into her jacket. Carefully, Emma noticed, making sure not to touch her burned arm, and picked up Luna, who had dried into a fluffy white cloud. As they headed toward the door, Sofia looked back at Emma with those two large eyes. Will I see you again? The girl asked, and there was something plaintive in her voice, some need for continuity or reassurance that this brief connection wouldn't disappear like apparently everything else in her life did. Emma found herself nodding before she'd consciously decided to. Luna will need another grooming in about 6 weeks. You can bring her back then. Sofia smiled, small and tentative, but real. And then they were gone, the Mercedes pulling away into evening traffic. Emma stood in her empty salon, surrounded by the smell of wet dog and lavender shampoo, and wondered what exactly she'd just set in motion. 3 days passed before Emma saw Antonio Caruso again. 3 days during which she groomed 17 dogs, took calls from anxious pet owners, and tried not to think about Sofia's cigarette burns or the barely controlled violence she'd seen in Antonio's eyes. She told herself she'd done her part, made the intervention that was needed, and whatever happened next was not her responsibility. Then Antonio walked into her salon at closing time, carrying a bouquet of flowers that looked absurdly out of place in his large hands. Emma looked up from cleaning the grooming tubs, her hands pruned and sore, her back aching from another long day. We're closed, she said automatically. I know. Antonio set the flowers, white roses, she noticed, elegant and expensive, on the front counter. I wanted to thank you properly and to talk to you about Sofia. Emma dried her hands slowly, buying herself time to think. She should send him away, should maintain professionals. Boundaries should not get further involved in whatever complicated situation this family represented. But something in his expression, tired, worn down in a way that wealth couldn't hide, made her gesture toward the small seating area by the window. 5 minutes, she said. Then I really do need to close up. Antonio sat in one of the chairs meant for waiting clients, and the incongruity of this obviously powerful man folding his large frame into the cheap plastic seat would have been funny under different circumstances. Emma took the chair across from him, maintaining distance, keeping her posture guarded. Sofia hasn't stopped talking about you, Antonio said without preamble. About how kind you were, how you let her help with Luna, how you listened to her. She wants to know if she can come back before 6 weeks. That's not really necessary for Luna's grooming schedule. I'm not talking about Luna. Antonio leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped between them. My daughter doesn't trust easily, Miss Torres. She's learned that adults fail her, that being vulnerable leads to pain. But something about you made her feel safe enough to show you those burns when she's been hiding them from everyone else, including me. Emma felt uncomfortable warmth in her chest, something that felt dangerously like caring about this child she barely knew. I'm glad she felt safe. But I'm a dog groomer, Mr. Caruso, not a therapist or a social worker. I can't be what Sofia needs. Can't or won't? Both. Emma kept her voice firm. Your daughter needs professional help processing her trauma. She needs a father who's present and engaged. She needs stability and consistency. Those aren't things I can provide. I know. Antonio ran a hand through his hair, disheveling the perfect styling. I've already hired a child psychologist. I've rearranged my work schedule to be home for dinner every night and to take her to school every morning. I've installed cameras throughout the house and conducted background checks on every employee who has any access to Sofia. But she asked specifically if she could see you again, and I'm trying very hard not to deny my daughter anything right now that might help her heal. Emma wanted to say no, wanted to protect herself from getting entangled in a situation that could only end in complication. She had her own life, her own struggles with a business that barely broke even, and student loans from a college education she'd never finished. She didn't have space for other people's broken families, especially when those families came with the kind of darkness she suspected surrounded Antonio Caruso. What exactly are you asking? She heard herself say instead. Sofia wants to volunteer here, to help with the dogs after school a few days a week. She won't be in your way. I can have someone drop her off and pick her up. She just wants to be around the animals. And around you. Antonio's expression was carefully neutral, but Emma could see the vulnerability underneath, the desperation of a parent trying to help a child he'd failed to protect. I'll pay you, of course, whatever you think is fair. I don't want your money, Emma said automatically. Everyone wants money, Miss Torres. Everyone needs it. Let me guess. You're working 12-hour days trying to keep this business afloat. You've got debt from school or medical bills or both, and you're one major equipment breakdown away from closing your doors. Antonio's assessment was delivered without judgment, but its accuracy made Emma's cheeks flush. I can help with that. Consider it payment for looking after Sofia a few hours a week. I'm not a charity case, Emma said, echoing his words from their first meeting. No. You're a woman who does the right thing even when it's difficult, who calls a potentially dangerous man instead of hiding behind bureaucracy, who treats other people's children with the care they deserve. Let me compensate you fairly for extending that care to my daughter. Emma looked at Antonio Caruso, at the expensive suit that couldn't hide his exhaustion, at the desperate hope in his eyes that he was trying so hard to contain, at the flowers he'd brought like some kind of peace offering. She thought about Sofia's burns, about Luna's matted fur, about all the small ways that neglect manifested when people were too overwhelmed to notice the damage accumulating around them. 1-month trial, Emma said finally. Sofia can come 3 days a week for 2 hours after school. No payment necessary, but you can donate to the local animal shelter in lieu of compensation. And the moment I think this arrangement isn't good for her, we stop. Her well-being comes first, always. Relief crashed over Antonio's features so completely that Emma saw exactly how much this had mattered to him, how much he'd been prepared to beg if necessary. "Thank you," he said simply. "You won't regret this." But as Emma watched him leave, as she locked up the salon and headed home to her tiny apartment, with plumbing that didn't work properly and heat that cut out randomly, she wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. She wondered if kindness was always worth the cost it extracted, if opening yourself to other people's pain ever did anything except invite that pain to take up residence in your own heart. She wondered. But she didn't call Antonio back to cancel, because Sofia's small voice asking, "Will I see you again?" had lodged itself somewhere in Emma's chest, and she'd spent too much of her life ignoring the quiet voices of children who needed someone to listen. Sofia started volunteering the following Monday. Antonio brought her personally, arriving 15 minutes before the agreed-upon time, with Sofia practically vibrating with excitement beside him. Emma was in the middle of grooming a hyperactive beagle who had no interest in standing still, and she gestured through the window for them to come around, to the back entrance. "You're early," Emma said when they entered, not unkindly. "Sofia was worried you might have changed your mind," Antonio said, his hand resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder. "She's been counting down the hours since Saturday." Emma looked at Sofia, at the careful way she held herself, at the hope and fear warring in her expression, at the pink jacket zipped to her chin despite the salon's warmth. Something in Emma's chest cracked open just a little, letting in light she'd been trying to keep out. "I don't change my mind once I make a commitment," Emma said, directing the words to Sofia rather than Antonio. "When I say you can help here, I mean it. Ready to learn about grooming?" Sofia nodded so enthusiastically that her dark curls bounced, and Emma saw Antonio's expression soften with gratitude and something else. Something that looked like relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "I'll pick her up at 6, Antonio said. "If there are any problems—" "There won't be," Emma interrupted. "We'll be fine. Go do whatever mysterious work you do that keeps you so busy." Something flickered in Antonio's eyes at that. Wariness, maybe, or assessment of how much Emma suspected about his life. But he just nodded and pressed a kiss to the top of Sofia's head before leaving, the door chiming behind him. Emma and Sofia looked at each other across the grooming salon. "So," Emma said, "rule number 1, always be gentle with the animals, even when they're difficult. They're scared and confused, and it's our job to make them feel safe. Rule number 2, listen more than you talk. Animals tell you what they need if you pay attention. Rule number 3, there's no such thing as a bad dog, only dogs who've been treated badly and are reacting to that treatment. Got it?" Sofia nodded seriously, absorbing the rules like they were sacred text. "Got it." "Good. Now come help me with Barkley here. He's got a lot of energy, but underneath, he just wants someone to be patient with him." They worked together for the next 2 hours, Emma showing Sofia how to brush out tangles, how to clean ears gently, how to recognize when an animal was getting overwhelmed and needed a break. Sofia was careful and attentive, her small hands surprisingly deft despite her obvious inexperience. She asked questions in that quiet voice of hers, listened intently to Emma's answers, and gradually began to relax as the afternoon wore on. By the time Antonio returned at 6, Sofia was laughing, actually laughing, as a tiny Pomeranian tried to lick her face. The sound stopped Antonio in his tracks as he entered, his expression transforming into something Emma couldn't quite name. She realized she'd probably never heard his daughter laugh before. Not like this. Not with such unguarded joy. "She's a natural," Emma told him, as Sofia reluctantly said goodbye to the Pomeranian. "Same time Wednesday?" "Yes," Antonio said, his voice rougher than usual. His eyes met Emma's over Sofia's head, and something passed between them, Understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. Thank you, Emma, more than you know. After they left, Emma finished cleaning up the salon, her mind churning with thoughts she didn't want to examine too closely. She'd told herself she was just helping a child who needed someone to care, that this was no different than volunteering at the shelter or fostering dogs who needed temporary homes. But she knew she was lying to herself, knew that Antonio Caruso's gratitude had stirred something in her that had nothing to do with Sofia and everything to do with the man himself. The flowers he'd brought were still on her counter, white roses that had bloomed fully in the 3 days since he'd left them. Emma touched one petal gently, then forced herself to look away. She was a dog groomer with barely enough money to keep her business running, and he was clearly someone who operated in a world she wanted nothing to do with. Whatever attraction she might feel was irrelevant and dangerous. But when she locked up for the night, she took the roses home with her anyway, and she didn't let herself think too hard about why. The pattern established itself over the following weeks. Sofia came 3 times a week, always arriving 15 minutes early with Antonio, always leaving reluctantly when he picked her up at 6. Emma taught her the basics of grooming, and Sofia absorbed every lesson with the intensity of someone who'd found purpose after drifting. The burns on her arm began to fade as days passed into weeks, the fresh ones healing, though Emma knew the scars, both physical and emotional, would take far longer to disappear. Antonio always arrived exactly on time for pickup, never late, never making Emma wait. Sometimes he lingered for a few minutes, asking about Sofia's progress, thanking Emma again for her kindness. They developed a careful rapport, these brief conversations that stayed surface level and safe, both of them maintaining distance, even as Emma felt the space between them shrinking incrementally with each interaction. On the 4th week, Antonio arrived early, 30 minutes before 6, his expression tight with tension that immediately put Emma on alert. "Is Sofia all right?" she asked before he could speak. "She's fine. Antonio glanced toward where Sofia was carefully brushing a nervous terrier, completely absorbed in her task. "Can we talk outside for a moment?" Emma's heart kicked up, some instinct warning her that whatever came next would change things. But she nodded and followed him out onto the sidewalk, the early evening air warm and heavy with approaching summer. "There's a situation," Antonio said without preamble, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry. "Someone from my past, someone who holds a grudge. He's been making threats, and I have reason to believe he might try to get to me through Sofia." Emma's stomach dropped. "You need to call the police. The police can't help with this." Antonio's expression was grim. "I'm handling it, but until it's resolved, I need to increase security around Sofia. That includes here." "Here? Antonio, this is a dog grooming salon, not—" "Exactly. It's a place where she feels safe, where she's starting to heal. I don't want to take that away from her by being obvious about protection." Antonio pulled out his phone, showing her a photo of a man. Dark hair, cold eyes, a scar running through his left eyebrow. "This is Marco DeLuca. If you see him anywhere near this salon, you call me immediately. Not the police, me. Understood?" Emma stared at the photo, at the unmistakable threat in those cold eyes, and felt reality crashing down around her carefully maintained ignorance. "What exactly do you do, Antonio?" He looked at her for a long moment, and Emma saw him weighing his answer, deciding how much truth she could handle. "I protect my family's interests. Sometimes that puts me in conflict with people who don't share my values regarding how business should be conducted. That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I can give you." Antonio's jaw was tight. "I won't lie to you, Emma. My world has darkness in it, but I keep that darkness away from Sofia, away from anyone innocent. You've never been in danger from me, and you never will be. But I might be in danger from your enemies." Emma heard her voice shake slightly. "Sofia might be." "Yes." Antonio's honesty was brutal. "That's why I'm telling you this. You have every right to end this arrangement, To tell me Sofia can't come here anymore, I would understand. But she's happier now than I've seen her in years, and taking this away from her, when she's just starting to heal. He trailed off, and Emma saw genuine anguish in his expression. She should end it, should protect herself, should refuse to get entangled in violence and threats, and men with scars who held grudges. She had her own life to worry about, her own survival to ensure. Getting involved with Antonio Caruso's world was monumentally stupid. I have security cameras, Emma heard herself say, and a panic button that goes directly to the police station 2 blocks away. The owner before me installed it after a break-in. Antonio's expression shifted. Surprise. Then something that looked like respect. That's good. I'll also have someone watching the salon during Sofia's hours. You won't see them, but they'll be close. Will this be resolved soon? I'm working on it. The way he said it made Emma's blood run cold again, because she heard the promise of violence in those simple words, heard the darkness he'd mentioned bleeding through, despite his attempts to contain it. I don't want to know details, Emma said quickly. I don't want to be involved in whatever you do to handle this, but I need to know that Sofia will be safe here, that I'm not putting her at risk by continuing this arrangement. She's safer here than anywhere else. Right now, except my own home. Antonio stepped closer, and Emma caught his scent. Expensive cologne mixed with something warmer, more human. You care about her. I see it in how you teach her, how you make sure she eats the snacks I pack, how you check her arms when you think I'm not looking to make sure there are no new marks. That care is worth more than any security detail I could hire. Emma's throat felt tight. She's a good kid. She deserves better than what she's been getting. Yes, Antonio agreed quietly. She does. And so do you, Emma Torres. You deserve better than working yourself to exhaustion in a business that's barely surviving. Better than living in an apartment where the heat doesn't work properly. Better than… He stopped, seeming to realize he'd revealed too much. You've been checking up on me. Emma should have felt violated, should have been angry. Instead, she just felt tired. Of course you have. Men like you always do. Men like me protect what matters. Antonio's gaze was intense, pinning her in place. And you matter. To Sofia, yes. But also… He cut himself off again, jaw clenching. I should go. Thank you for agreeing to continue with Sofia. I'll make sure you're protected. He turned and walked back into the salon before Emma could respond, before she could process what he'd been about to say. She stood on the sidewalk for another moment, her heart racing, her mind spinning with implications she didn't want to examine. When she went back inside, Antonio was crouched beside Sofia, talking quietly to her while she listened with serious attention. Emma caught fragments. Need to be very careful. If anyone you don't know tries to talk to you, stay close to Emma. And saw Sofia's expression shift from happiness to fear to determination. Then Antonio was leaving, his hand lingering on Sofia's head, in a gesture so tender it made Emma's chest ache. The door chimed behind him, and Emma was left with a little girl who was trying very hard not to cry, and a situation she had no idea how to navigate. Hey, Emma said softly, moving to crouch beside Sofia. Your papa is really good at keeping people safe, isn't he? Sofia nodded, swiping at her eyes. He protects everyone. That's his job. Then we trust him to do his job, and we do ours. Our job is taking care of these dogs and making sure they feel loved and safe. Think you can do that? Another nod, more confident this time. Yes. Good. Now, that terrier over there needs someone to tell him he's being very brave about his bath. Want to help me with that? They finished the evening's grooming together, and Emma tried not to think about men with scars and cold eyes, about the darkness that Antonio Caruso had admitted lived in his world. She tried not to think about the way her heart had stuttered when he'd said, "You matter." Tried not to analyze the protective edge in his voice when he'd talked about her failing business and broken heater. But that night, alone in her cold apartment, Emma found herself pulling out her phone and staring at Antonio's number. She'd saved it after that first call, telling herself it was just practical, just in case something happened with Sofia. Now she looked at it and wondered what would happen if she called for a different reason entirely, if she crossed the line from professional courtesy into something far more dangerous and complicated. She didn't call, but she didn't delete the number either. And when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of white roses and dark eyes, and the feeling of being protected by someone who understood what it meant to stand between the people you cared about and the cruelty of the world. 2 weeks passed in careful tension. Sofia continued her volunteering, but Emma noticed the little girl checking the windows more often, noticed how she startled at sudden noises, noticed the way her small body would relax fractionally only when Antonio arrived for pickup. Emma found herself checking the windows too, looking for unfamiliar faces, for anyone matching the photo of Marco DeLuca that now lived in her phone. She saw Antonio's security presence without meaning to. A man in a sedan parked across the street, who was trying too hard to look casual. Another man walking past the salon's windows at regular intervals. They were good at staying unobtrusive, but Emma had learned to notice details, and once she knew what to look for, the protection became obvious. It should have made her feel safe. Instead, it made her hyper-aware of the danger, made her understand viscerally that whatever Antonio was dealing with was serious enough to require constant vigilance. She started locking the salon's back door during business hours, started keeping her phone in her pocket instead of leaving it in the back room, started planning escape routes in case something went wrong. Antonio noticed. "You're afraid," he said one evening when he came to collect Sofia. Emma had sent the girl to wash her hands, giving them a moment of relative privacy. "Of course I'm afraid," Emma said, not bothering to deny it. "You told me someone dangerous is targeting your family, and your daughter is in my care 3 days a week. I'd be stupid not to be afraid." "Fear is smart. Panic is dangerous." Antonio's gaze was steady on hers. "You're handling this well, better than most would. I don't feel like I'm handling anything. I feel like I'm waiting for something terrible to happen and trying to pretend everything is normal for Sofia's sake. That's what handling it looks like." Antonio's expression softened slightly. "The situation will be resolved within the week, I promise." Emma wanted to ask what resolved meant, wanted to know if it meant violence, if it meant someone would get hurt or worse. But she'd told Antonio she didn't want details, and she'd meant it. Some things were better left unknown. Some darkness was better left unexamined. "Okay," she said instead. "One more week. But after this is over, I need you to promise me that Sofia won't be caught up in this kind of thing again, that you'll keep whatever you do separate from her life." "I can't promise something that's outside my complete control," Antonio said quietly. "But I can promise I'll do everything in my power to protect her. And you." The "and you" landed with weight Emma wasn't prepared for. She looked up at Antonio, at the exhaustion in his eyes, at the tension in his shoulders that never fully released, at the gray threading his dark hair that had definitely increased since she'd met him. He carried the weight of protection like other people carried briefcases, constant and heavy, and something in Emma responded to that burden, recognized it because she carried her own version. "Why do you care about protecting me?" Emma asked before she could stop herself. "I'm just the dog groomer who looks after your daughter." "You're not just anything." Antonio's voice dropped lower, intimate despite the public setting. "You're the woman who saw my daughter's pain and chose to call me instead of taking the easier path. You're the person who makes Sofia laugh when I'd forgotten she knew how. You're—" He stopped, seeming to wrestle with something internal. "You're someone who deserves to be protected, Emma. That's all." But it wasn't all. Emma could hear what he wasn't saying, could see it in the intensity of his gaze, in the way he stood just slightly too close, in the careful control he maintained over himself, like he was holding back something that wanted to break free. She felt it too, that pull, that awareness that had been building since their first meeting, since he'd looked at her across a parking garage and really seen her. Sofia emerged from the back room, her hands clean, her expression bright with the kind of contentment that came from a good day's work. She said goodbye to Emma with a hug that lasted longer than usual, and Emma held the small girl tightly, feeling protective instincts surge that she had no right to feel for someone else's child. After they left, Emma locked up the salon and headed home, her mind churning with thoughts she couldn't organize. She was getting too involved, too attached, too invested in a family that wasn't hers, and a situation that could only end badly. She needed to establish boundaries, needed to protect herself before she got hurt. But when her phone buzzed with a text message an hour later, her heart leaped before she could control it. The message was from Antonio. Sofia wanted me to tell you that today was her favorite day so far. Thank you for making her feel special. Emma stared at the text for a long moment, then typed back, "She is special, and so are you for recognizing what she needs." She hit send before she could overthink it, before she could analyze the implications of acknowledging whatever was building between them. The response came quickly. "Careful, Emma. Compliments like that might make me think you're starting to like me." Emma's lips curved despite herself. Maybe I am. Maybe that scares me as much as the situation with DeLuca. It should. I'm far more dangerous to your peace of mind than Marco DeLuca could ever be. The honesty of it, the self-awareness, made Emma's breath catch. She set her phone down, trying to decide if she should end this conversation before it went further, before they said things that couldn't be unsaid. But her phone buzzed again, and she couldn't help but look. "But if it helps, you're dangerous to my peace of mind too. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the day you called me instead of letting bureaucracy handle my daughter's abuse. That kind of courage and compassion is rare, Emma, and I find myself wanting to be around it, around you, more than is probably wise." Emma's hands trembled as she typed, "What are we doing, Antonio?" "I don't know, but I know I don't want to stop." Neither did Emma, and that was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. That despite the threats and the darkness and the complications, despite every rational reason to maintain distance, she wanted to move closer instead. Wanted to understand the man who protected his family with such fierce devotion, who looked at her like she was worth protecting too, who made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. She typed one more message. "1 week. After you resolve this situation with DeLuca, we'll talk about what this is and what it might become. Deal?" "Deal. Stay safe, Emma." "You too, Antonio." Emma set her phone aside and tried to sleep, tried not to think about what she might be inviting into her life. But her dreams were full of dark eyes and white roses, of little girls who needed protection and men who provided it at costs Emma couldn't yet calculate. And somewhere in those dreams, she felt herself letting go of the careful distance she'd maintained, felt herself beginning to fall, despite all the warnings her rational mind was screaming. The week passed slowly, each day heavy with anticipation and dread. Sofia continued to volunteer, but Emma noticed the increased tension in Antonio when he dropped her off, noticed the way his security presence doubled, then tripled. Something was coming to a head, and Emma found herself checking her phone constantly, waiting for news she wasn't sure she wanted to receive. On the 6th day, Sofia didn't come for her usual session. Antonio sent a brief text. "Keeping her home today. Precautionary measure. Will explain soon." Emma spent the afternoon in knots, unable to focus on work, jumping at every sound. She groomed 3 dogs badly enough that she had to redo portions of the work, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to concentrate. When 6 o'clock came and went with no word from Antonio, panic began to set in. At 7:30, her phone rang. "It's done," Antonio said without preamble, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The situation is resolved. Sofia is safe." Emma sank into one of the waiting area chairs, relief so profound it made her dizzy. "What happened?" "I told you I didn't want details." I changed my mind. Tell me. There was a pause. Then Antonio's careful voice. DeLuca came at me directly instead of going after Sofia. It was a tactical error on his part. The authorities now have evidence of multiple crimes, including attempted murder, and he'll be in prison for the rest of his life. No one in my world will try to help him or seek revenge on his behalf. He broke too many codes, burned too many bridges. It's finished. Emma heard what he wasn't saying, heard the violence implied in "came at me directly," heard the darkness that surrounded however Antonio had orchestrated DeLuca's capture, but she also heard the relief in his voice, the genuine joy that his daughter was safe. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Another pause, longer this time. "Bruised? Nothing serious. But you are hurt." "Emma." "Come to the salon," Emma interrupted. "Now. Let me see." "It's late. You should go home." "Antonio Caruso, get in your expensive car and drive to the salon right now, or I swear I'll show up at whatever compound or mansion or fortress you live in and break down your door." She heard something that might have been a laugh, rough and surprised. That's quite a threat from a dog groomer. "I'm serious." "I know. That's what scares me." But she could hear rustling, hear movement, hear him giving in. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Emma used the time to dig out the first aid kit she kept for minor injuries from particularly difficult grooming sessions. She made coffee in the small pot she kept in the back room. She tried not to think about why seeing Antonio hurt bothered her so much, why the thought of him in pain made her chest tight with concern she had no business feeling. He arrived in 13 minutes, and Emma saw immediately that he'd downplayed his condition. He moved stiffly, favoring his left side, and there was a bruise darkening his jaw that he'd tried to hide by coming in with his collar turned up. His knuckles were split and scabbed, and when he sat down in the chair, she indicated he couldn't quite suppress a wince. "This is nothing," he said, reading her expression. "Let me decide that." Emma knelt beside him with the first aid kit, her hands surprisingly steady now that she had something concrete to do. "Show me." Antonio hesitated, then unbuttoned his shirt with careful movements that revealed more bruises, dark purple spreading across his ribs, an angry red mark that looked like a burn across his shoulder. Emma's breath hissed between her teeth, but she didn't speak, just began cleaning the burns with gentle efficiency. "I've had worse," Antonio said quietly. "That doesn't make this okay." "No," he agreed, "but it was worth it. Sofia is safe. That's all that matters." Emma finished with the burn and moved to his split knuckles, cleaning away the dried blood with careful attention. Antonio's hands were large and strong, marked with old scars that spoke of a lifetime of violence, but he held them perfectly still under her ministrations, trusting her to touch him despite the pain. "You protected your daughter," Emma said, not looking up from her work. "And you got hurt doing it. That matters too, Antonio. You matter." His hand moved before she could react, his fingers catching her chin and tilting her face up to meet his gaze. The intensity there stole her breath, made her forget how to form words, made the small salon feel suddenly very intimate, despite the fluorescent lighting and the smell of antiseptic. "You're dangerous to me, Emma Torres," Antonio said softly. "You make me want things I shouldn't want, make me think about futures I have no right to imagine. You make me want to be better than I am, to be someone worthy of the way you look at me right now." "How am I looking at you?" Emma whispered, though she knew the answer, could feel it in the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "Like I'm not a monster, like the darkness in my world doesn't define everything I am." Antonio's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, the gesture achingly tender. "Like you might care about me, despite all the reasons you shouldn't." "I do care," Emma admitted, the truth escaping before wisdom could stop it. "I care too much, probably. I care about Sofia, and I care about you, and I'm terrified of what that means." It means we stop pretending this is just about my daughter. Antonio leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers, his breath warm against her skin. It means we acknowledge that something's been building between us since the moment I walked into your salon and saw you standing there covered in dog hair with the fiercest expression I'd ever seen. It means we decide if we're brave enough to explore what this could become. Emma's mind screamed warnings about danger and complications and worlds colliding that should stay separate. But her heart, that traitorous organ, was already reaching for him, already imagining what it might feel like to be protected and cherished by someone who understood the value of both strength and gentleness. "I'm not brave," Emma said. "I'm just a dog groomer who—" "You called me instead of child services," Antonio interrupted. "You saw cigarette burns on a child and made the harder choice because you believed it was the right one. You opened your business and your time to help my daughter heal, even knowing it put you at risk. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met, Emma. Don't diminish that." Tears pricked at Emma's eyes, surprising her with their intensity. She'd spent so long thinking of herself as ordinary, as someone just barely surviving, that having someone see her courage felt overwhelming and revelatory. "You see me," she said wonderingly. "You really see me." "Yes," Antonio confirmed simply. "I see you, and I want to keep seeing you, if you'll let me." Emma knew she should hesitate, should ask for time to think, should protect herself from the inevitable complications. But she'd spent 29 years being careful, being cautious, playing it safe. And where had it gotten her? To a business barely surviving, to an apartment that was falling apart, to a life marked by exhaustion and loneliness, punctuated only by the wagging tails of other people's dogs. Maybe it was time to be reckless. Maybe it was time to reach for something that scared her, because the alternative, letting this slip away, scared her more. "Okay," Emma said, her voice steady despite the way her hands trembled. "Yes, I want to see where this goes, but I need you to promise me something." "Anything." "Promise me you'll keep trying to protect Sofia, but that you'll also protect yourself. Promise me you won't make her an orphan by being too willing to sacrifice yourself for her safety. She needs her father, Antonio. And I—" Emma stopped, shocked by what she'd almost said, by how close. She'd come to admitting feelings that were far too big for how long they'd known each other. "And you?" Antonio prompted, his eyes searching hers. "And I need you to not get yourself killed before I figure out if what I'm feeling is real or just some kind of Florence Nightingale syndrome from bandaging your injuries." Emma tried to make it light, tried to deflect, but Antonio saw through her immediately. "It's real," he said with absolute certainty. "What you're feeling is real, because what I'm feeling is real, and I stopped believing in coincidence a long time ago. This, us, it means something." Then he was kissing her, his split lips pressing against hers, with a gentleness that contradicted the violence written into his bruised body. Emma made a small sound of surprise that transformed into something closer to surrender as she kissed him back, her hands coming up to frame his face, careful of his bruised jaw. The kiss was slow and deep and tasted like coffee, an antiseptic, and something darker that was uniquely Antonio, uniquely this moment of choosing each other despite all logic. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Antonio rested his forehead against hers again. "I should go," he said, though he made no move to leave. "Let you get home, but I need you to know something first." "What?" Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "I will protect you the way I protect Sofia. Not because you need protecting. You're strong enough to take care of yourself. But because you deserve to have someone in your corner. Someone who will stand between you and anything that threatens your peace. I want to be that person, Emma, if you'll let me." Emma thought about her business that barely broke even, about her apartment with the broken heater, about her student loans that would follow her to the grave. She thought about how she'd been handling everything alone for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer to share the burden. And she thought about Sofia's healing burns, about Antonio's protective fury, about how this man loved deeply enough to put himself in danger without hesitation. "I'll let you," she said, "on one condition. Name it. Let me protect you back. Let me be the person who bandages your wounds and calls you on your bullshit and reminds you that you're more than just a weapon for protecting others. Deal?" Antonio's smile was slow and genuine and beautiful enough to take Emma's breath away. "Deal." He kissed her once more, brief and sweet, then stood carefully, buttoning his shirt back over his bruised ribs. Emma walked him to the door, unwilling to let him leave, but knowing he needed rest, needed time for his body to heal from whatever violence had marked it. "Tomorrow," Antonio said at the door. "Dinner. You, me, and Sofia, if you're comfortable with that. Let me take you somewhere nice. Let me show you what my world looks like when it's not full of threats and danger." "I'd like that," Emma said, and meant it completely. She watched him drive away in his black Mercedes, then locked up the salon and headed home. Her apartment was still cold, her heater still broken, her life still marked by all the same struggles that had existed that morning. But something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer facing everything alone, no longer carrying all her burdens in isolation. Emma pulled out her phone and looked at her banking app, at the numbers that never seemed to grow despite her constant work. Then she opened her student loan portal, at the crushing debt that defined so much of her anxiety and limitation. She was about to close it when the screen flickered, refreshed, and showed something impossible. Balance, 0.0. Emma stared at the screen, certain it was a mistake, certain the website had glitched or her phone was malfunctioning. She closed the app and reopened it, but the number remained. $0 owed, fully paid in full, a notation showing a large payment made just hours earlier. Her phone rang, and Emma answered without checking who it was, her voice shaky. "Antonio?" "I apologize for overstepping," he said, no preamble, no pretense. "But I know about the debt. I know it's been crushing you, limiting your options, making every day a struggle to stay afloat. And I have resources I don't use, wealth that does nothing but accumulate. So I used some of it to free you." That's $73,000, Emma said, her voice breaking. "Antonio, you can't just—" "I already did. It's done, Emma. Non-refundable. You can be angry with me if you need to, but you can't undo it." He paused, then continued more softly. "I pay my debts. You gave me back my daughter by making sure I knew she was being hurt. You gave Sofia a place to heal and grow. You gave me—" His voice caught. "You gave me hope that I could be more than the darkness I've lived in. That debt is worth far more than $73,000. This is just a start." Emma sank onto her threadbare couch, tears streaming down her face. Tears of shock and relief, and overwhelming gratitude and fear of what accepting such a gift might mean. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll stop working yourself to death. Say you'll hire an assistant for the salon so you're not doing everything alone. Say you'll use this freedom to actually live instead of just surviving." Antonio's voice was fierce with emotion. "Say you'll let me help you build the life you deserve, Emma. Please." "This is too much," Emma whispered. "It's too fast, too intense. I barely know you." "Then get to know me. Let me take you to dinner tomorrow. Let me show you who I am, beyond the protection and the darkness. Let me prove that this, what we're starting, is worth the leap of faith I'm asking you to take." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of years of debt lifting from her shoulders, feeling possibilities opening that had been closed for so long she'd forgotten they existed. She could hire help. She could upgrade her equipment. She could move to an apartment where the heat worked. She could breathe. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. But Antonio?" "Yes?" "No more surprises like this without talking to me first. If we're doing this, if we're exploring what this could be, Then we communicate. We make decisions together when they affect both of us. Clear? She heard the smile in his voice. Crystal clear. I can do that. Good. Then I'll see you tomorrow for dinner. Tomorrow, Antonio confirmed. Sleep well, Emma. You too. And Antonio, thank you for everything. After they hung up, Emma sat in her cold apartment for a long time, her phone in her hand, her student loan portal still showing that impossible zero. She thought about the cigarette burns on Sofia's arm, about the way a simple act of kindness had snowballed into something that was changing her entire life. She thought about Antonio's bruised ribs and his gentle hands, and the way he'd kissed her like she was precious. And she thought about tomorrow, about dinner with a man who terrified and attracted her in equal measure, about spending time with a little girl who'd somehow claimed a piece of Emma's heart, about stepping into a world she didn't fully understand but was choosing to trust anyway. It was reckless. It was potentially dangerous. It violated every careful boundary Emma had constructed to protect herself from getting hurt. But it was also possibility. It was hope. It was the chance for something better than simply surviving. The chance to actually live, to be seen and cherished and protected in return for offering the same. Emma stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city lights that stretched beyond her limited view. Somewhere out there, Antonio Caruso was probably checking on his daughter, probably making sure all the security measures were in place, probably thinking about Emma the way she was thinking about him. And somewhere in the uncertain future, Emma could almost see it. A life where she wasn't alone, where she had a partner who understood strength and gentleness in equal measure, where she could help raise a little girl who needed her, where she could finally stop just surviving and start truly living. It was worth the leap of faith. It was worth the risk. Emma had called a Mafia boss instead of child services. She'd opened her salon to his wounded daughter. She'd let herself care about both of them, despite every reason not to. Taking one more step into that dangerous, beautiful unknown felt almost easy by comparison. Almost.